So my name is Andy Saltarelli. I'm the Senior Director of Teaching, Design, and Practice at Stanford. And my colleague René Kizilcec, who has done incredible work in this area, was not able to come. But thank you very much to his cooperation, and many of you have probably seen some of his work in the MOOC space as well. So we were going for the longest title in the Open edX conference, so it kind of pushed over to the right side on the Sketch thing, and I think we accomplished that. So maybe that's why you're here. You just sort of saw a long title. But we will. I'm going to talk about some of our work in looking at achievement gaps in MOOCs and then how we address them through some psychological interventions. Okay, so kind of start with a simple premise. We know that every learner coming into our context is trying to get from A to B. Now, their motivations can be varied, and we understand that. And we could debate or kind of define what does B look like for each individual learner, whether that's appreciation for something, they're just auditing, or they want to get a certificate, or they want to get a MicroMasters. But let's just say they're trying to get from A to B in the learning environment. Now, there are certainly barriers about the context that keep them from being successful, causing them to drop out or not persist or be successful in the space. And over the last 4 days, this community, from eMOOCs to Open edX has looked at a lot of these barriers, whether they're pedagogical, right? Bad learning goals, poorly defined assessments, bad UI, all sorts of things that we're actually pretty good at identifying, and I think many in this room have spent a lot of time, trying to ameliorate. But what I want to talk about today is kind of barriers that might be a little less visible to us as designers, us as administrators, and those who are just engaged in the community. And what I want to kind of posit is that there are things about the learning context that might be harder to see or understand that are making some learners not feel welcome. And that the mechanism there is that there are things, psychological barriers that are keeping some of these students and learners from feeling like this is a place where they can learn. And that's kind of what I'll talk about today. But first, just a quick side tangent, a personal story of where kind of I came from as a social psychologist and got interested in looking at psychological barriers. Before, at least a decade ago, when Spock was still, some officer in the Starfleet and not, apparently, and we just called them online courses, right? So a decade ago, I was a dutiful graduate student, and I was teaching face-to-face courses, and my department came to me and said, you know what, this online thing's pretty interesting. Why don't, you're young, you have a laptop, you seem to know technology. Would you be able to, maybe teach the first online course we've ever taught? And being the dumb, naive graduate student, I said, sure, let's do that. How hard can this online stuff be? And the other, part of the equation was we're going to offer this in 3 weeks in summer sessions. So I grabbed one of the very first versions of Camtasia, and I said, how hard can this be? And I went, full bore at porting my face-to-face course into the online space, almost tit for tat. This is one of actually I watched this and it's so painful. But 31 minutes is actually on the short end of the lectures that I had in my course. So I learned a lot, and part of the reason why I stuck with instructional design is that I wish there was someone to help me at that time develop a good course, and would have saved me a lot of pain. But one of the things that I would do in my face-to-face courses is a cooperative pedagogical approach called constructive controversy, where you pair students up, two sides of a controversial issue, like who's better, Stanford or Cal, or I don't know, for a developmental psych course, should we give toddlers walkers before they can walk on their own? So in a face-to-face setting, we do this over 70 minutes, 5-step process, and then at the end they have to create this synthetic statement. 40 years of meta-analyses show that this cooperative learning pedagogy is highly efficacious. Half standard deviation increases in achievement, motivation, and student well-being, things that we care a lot about, right? So I said, okay, well, I'm going to do this online. It's face-to-face, perfect. I can port this online. It's going to be great. it wasn't great. Okay, so this was an asynchronous course. I did it over 5 days, 6 days. I paired them up in a discussion forum and, sort of followed the pedagogical approach. Students dropped out, students complained, students got angry at me, students got angry at each other, and most of them did not finish the assignment. And so, we could kind of sit here and say, so what were the barriers to that? Some of them could have been UI, could have been messaging, could have been, sort of where I put them in the course. Maybe they weren't ready for this type of asynchronous learning. But as a social psychologist, I started to think about what was breaking down like between the learner that might have caused these problems. So we did it, you don't have to look into this too much, but we did a series of studies trying to isolate what was the issue. Why in this asynchronous space was this wonderful pedagogical approach breaking down? You can see we tried different types of experimental manipulations. We had them do it over video, audio, and text. We found no difference between that. We tried different UI, different messaging, but every time asynchronous would have poor outcomes. And so we started to investigate this, and one of the things that we zeroed in on, we're able to detect from not only just talking to learners, but using some inventories, is that connectedness between students in the asynchronous space was breaking down. And there's some need-based theories. Many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That you need to meet some basic needs so that someone can have more proper self-regulation and self-actualization. Well, another version of this in the psychological space is that we have learners have basic innate needs for competence, autonomy, and belongingness. And what we were finding is that belongingness was breaking down in the asynchronous version of this. And so we isolated that and we manipulated that by a very quick introductory activity where students were able to pick who they wanted to work with based on a set of common factors. Probably in many of our courses you do a similar introductory activity, and I'm here to say these are very useful activities. Less than 3 minutes almost completely ameliorated the negative effects that we were finding in the asynchronous space. So they did this quick activity, they got to choose who they wanted to work with, they felt like they had something in common with them, and almost all of the decreases in motivation, achievement, and belongingness that we were seeing in the asynchronous space were ameliorated. So anyway, this was kind of my introduction to looking at psychological barriers in online courses in ways that really small things we can do that can have a relatively large impact on outcomes. And for those sets of studies, that barrier, that belongingness barrier, was pretty common across all learners, right? But what if that's not the case? What if some of these barriers are unequally distributed across different types of learners? And certainly that's something that we want to know about in the MOOC space, which led to some of our work on the Global Achievement Gap paper that I'll talk about here. Now this isn't really fair to not, because many of us, and I think many of us are in this room because we feel a draw to the mission of providing high quality access to education to anyone, anytime in the world. And democratizing education is something that is a really appealing enterprise, right? And it is for me too. But we say things like, now there's going to be no barriers to race, color, sex, or wealth barriers to access to the best information in the world. Now, even at the time, there were contrarians, right, saying, is this really true, especially given the preponderance of Western elite institutions sort of being the main proprietors of this? Will they be able to actually provide high-quality learning to learners in the developing world and other types of places? And so this was an open question for us that led to analyzing 55 courses. And what you'll see here, the Human Development Index is a UN Development Fund index. It's a composite of, I think, education, socioeconomic status, and a few other things. We found it's highly correlated with persistence in a course. So students in lower developed countries, on average, less than 3% less persistence in our courses. And if we really believe in the vision of providing high quality access, there appears to be a barrier to some of these learners. And so, again, you could ask, well, what are those barriers? What would you think are some of the causes of this gap.
Language.
Absolutely, language. Yeah.
Presenters with Western features.
Okay, white dudes. Okay. Internet connectivity, absolutely. Anyone else? Yeah. Oh, awareness? Knowing how to find them, and even just the prior, you have to have some set of prior knowledge to know, like, this is the type of course for me, right? That, yeah, so those are all completely valid, and I think, you know, many of those are cited as the barriers, but we also wanted to look at maybe there's something about the learning environment that makes these learners feel like they don't belong. And so there's a large literature on social identity threat that we've looked at least certainly in the States, on women in STEM disciplines not feeling welcome, and those leading to some negative outcomes for them. Minorities in majority-led and run classrooms. And so we started to explore this. So social identity threat is the fear of being seen as less capable because of your social group. And we hypothesized that that might be also something that was affecting these learners. It impairs working memory, persistence in learning. We know this. We have good data on it, that this is one mechanism by which people underperform in certain learning environments. As I said, it's contributed to academic achievement gaps in the United States. But the good news was that we have very good, efficacious interventions to reduce social identity threat. The problem for us was those are all done in face-to-face contexts over, they're quite large. Usually you'd, come into a classroom 3 times over a semester and do, 20 to 50-minute activity with students to help them reprocess sort of their lack of belonging and help them reframe it in a way that would help them to be successful. And we wanted to do this in a fully online course as quickly as possible and as scalable as possible. So we took two interventions that have been done in face-to-face context. We put them in a pre-course survey for 2 different MOOCs, and this is what we got. 2 randomized experiments. First was in a Stanford MOOC. This was self-paced, 90 different lectures, lots of quizzing. And then we replicated this in a Harvard MOOC on public policy. This was a cohort-based, very different. I believe it was more in the humanities, subject-wise. The intervention was embedded in a survey at the course start, and the median duration of actually being time on task with that activity was less than 5 minutes. This is just the design of the study with control, where they just got some study skills tips, and then social belonging intervention and value reference affirmation. So real briefly, social belonging intervention, they read testimonials from other students that were also worried about their belonging in this type of course. Then they write about their the experience of those students and describe just in their own words, how did that unfold? And then finally write a note for an incoming student who might also have that same type of experience. Again, less than 5 minutes, pre-course survey. Value reference, relevance affirmation, pretty similar. Pick 2 values that are most important to you, and write about how taking this course reflects and reinforces those values. And then write a note to your future self, remembering your values while in the course. Okay, pretty small things. Now you can see here, this is in the control, you see the gap between the less developed countries and the more developed countries. And in both of the interventions, that gap was completely closed by, again, very small intervention. And this is on course material study. This is the first course, databases course. And then in the replication, we see the same thing. And this is an interesting thing. So the theory goes that after going through these activities, it creates a virtuous cycle of reprocessing kind of social information around you, and that, over time, that actually you're able to process and become integrated in learning contexts better. And so even over time, we see that, sustained interest in our courses was much higher for those who were in the social belonging and affirmation intervention, and we're continuing to do work in this area. So I just want to mention, we've done this, René has done this in a couple of other contexts. Here on ShuiTangX, China's largest MOOC provider, I believe, running Open edX. In an English language learning course, we use the same interventions. But this time, some of our pre-work, their pre-work in this course, showed that males did not feel as welcome as females in this course and usually underperform in language learning overall. And also those in the rural areas taking this course also felt less competent in these areas. And so those are the learners that were targeted. Here you can see this is the value relevance affirmation in Chinese that they did. And so here you can see the gap between lower class men and significant gap in completion rate between lower class men, upper class women. So for lower class men, significant increase in their persistence, not fully closing the gap between them and upper class women, but closing the achievement gap by a significant amount, and reducing their dropout rate by 24%. So again, a different context for these interventions, just showing just how scalable and extensible they can be. And then just a last example, we've been sort of playing around with issues of gender imbalances in the registrations for our course. So see if you can see the difference. What's different? Other than I have a messed up slide, but.
There's a person, and it's a woman.
It's a woman? Anything else? It's hard to see on the screen, I know. So, and then just a quick statement about this being an inclusive and supportive environment. Before changing this on the registration page, it was 24.9% females, and after it's 27.4%. So again, just small things that we can do to make even the registration process more welcoming for our learners. So just to kind of wrap up, our interventions support people despite we did not give them internet access. We did not help them to learn the language better of the course. We did not give them mobile access to the course. All we did was give them a small psychological intervention at the beginning of the course that took them less than 5 minutes to do. It kind of shows us that social identity threat matter globally, and even in online environments where there's minimal social interaction, that learners are always gathering information about whether they belong and whether people like them belong in a course, even if they're not interacting much with other real learners, right? Whether that's pictures of august campuses and, again, white male and female faculty at elite institutions. Students are always gathering information about whether they belong, and we've been able to kind of show this through this research. Right. One big takeaway that access is necessary, but certainly not sufficient. I want to make the point that theory still matters. Now, my colleagues who are doing wonderful learning analytic work, and you can do 100 A/B tests at once, that's awesome, and I think we should continue to do that work, and using things like Bayesian knowledge tracing to understand and dynamically adapt learning environments for students is useful, but I also think we still have a lot to learn from psychology and in other fields that will help us to reduce the amount of tests that we have to do and to find the most efficacious interventions and ways. And for this, these are really highly scalable, cheap ways to do that. And kind of the next step is that targeted interventions need to be integrated more seamlessly into the platform. Now, we find that for learners who don't have social identity threat, we can actually do a little bit of harm with these interventions. And so targeting these interventions only to those groups who may not feel like they belong is really one of the next steps, and we'll be talking to the community on how to do that and leverage that better. So I think that's it. Thank you. Got a little bit of time for questions. Yeah. Oh.
Hi. So you were saying about how, at the end there, how the interventions are more effective and potentially less harmful if they're targeted. How aware are these students typically that they're suffering from this social identity threat? Like, are they conscious of the fact that they're feeling like they don't belong? Or is it something that just affects them without them realizing it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the way that we detect is usually we survey them. They're not usually able to articulate, the fact that they feel threatened or feel like they don't belong. But if you give them a quick activity just to talk about their goals for the course, usually you can detect whether they feel competent, connected, and have sort of what they need to be successful in the course. So, for one, just targeted could be just using basic demographic information if we know traditionally in this type of course these types of learners. But I think you're trying to get to the point of even being more fine-grained in the way that we target those interventions, which is a great question. Yeah.
Thank you. This was a very interesting presentation. Is your pre-survey, are these questions public somewhere? So could we use the same approaches?
Absolutely. In the Science article that I reference in a few slides back, we've put all of the interventions in there. If you can't find it, just let me know. I'm happy to share them. It's public knowledge, and it's something that we are now implementing across Harvard, MIT, and Stanford MOOCs as good interventions in most of our MOOCs. So, but yeah, it's definitely something that can be shared and used by others, and hope they do. Yeah, down here.
Hello, thanks for the great presentation. In the course on Trait on X, you have a decrease for the high-income women. Do you have an explanation for that?
Good eyes. That's exactly what I was talking about. For some who may not be suffering from social identity threat, actually going through the intervention decreases their performance a little bit. Now, that wasn't statistically significant from the control group, but we see that consistently over time for those who are in the majority or feel welcome that having the same intervention as others, and we can hypothesize why that is, but that's why we need to be doing more targeted interventions for them.
I was wondering if you had explored any interventions during the course and what those would look like?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. We have not, but in the face-to-face literature, usually they have booster sessions. Like I said, over time, whether that's over the course of a whole year or a whole just 16-week course, they would do booster sessions. And again, that comes back to, can we detect someone who's having issues, right? I've developed good models of detecting whether they're not progressing sort of in their content knowledge, but socially as well, and their social well-being. How do we detect that? So that, again, that could be another adaptive intervention that could be done. So, yeah. And while I'm waiting, I just want to thank, we have our Open edX team here. They have done a lot to facilitate our research. So I want to thank these guys sitting here, whether that's helping with pre-course surveys or just the overall infrastructure. They've been wonderful. So thank you guys. Yeah.
I would like to ask, if you had, if the course UI had better social interaction between the learners, would that boost, in your opinion, the social belongingness, or would it make it harder for people to blend in, for example, in the discussion or something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there is, so going back to kind of my own research that I started with, there's the concept of mere belonging, right? And there's very small things that we can make people, you know, sort of feel like there's social presence in the course without forcing them, because many of them haven't come into the course for a social experience, and forcing them to do that can actually harm their motivation and the kind of their persistence in the course. But there are small things like, you know, an interactive, a quick, you know, sort of introductory activity where you just find someone else who has something in common with you and you just say hello, or, you know, showing how many people have done an assignment, or, you know, those sorts of things. There's good literature, it's just called mere belonging, that it doesn't take much to actually make people feel connected in online spaces. So, but that's a really good question, because there's a threshold of some people, yeah, if they're forced to be social when they haven't signed up to do that, that can be a problem.
Hi, fantastic presentation. This is really amazing work. I have a situation where we have done the same MOOC in 3 different languages, knowing that they're going to, you know, geographically we can see where they're going to go. So we have English one, French one, and a Spanish one. And we, you know, with our infrastructure, because Amnesty International, we notice that which offices are pushing out which courses through the marketing. So we have a good idea of which countries we're targeting. And we're just like getting the new data sets in now, and they're quite, I mean, there's quite some radical differences in completion rates, in male and females, and all of this, and how people work through the course, whether or not they get a certificate. There's so many cultural differences that are coming through. What would be your advice to me, like, as someone, like, where do I start? Because there's actually so much going on there, and we're going to be about to launch another one now in 4 languages, adding Arabic, which is another fun twist, because that's a language I don't speak. Mm-hmm. So then I'm doing that quite blind, but obviously with the teams, I have the advantage of working with a team in the region to develop that one. So we have potentials to do, you know, an infinite amount of things, but at the same time, you know, we have to make some decisions on where to start.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. I'll sidestep it for a second by just saying that, you know, our work here is by no means does that sort of preclude us from doing good localization work with our courses, or other good inclusive teaching practices, like using examples from different locales and trying to have a more diverse instructor set, and all those things. Those are just heavier lifts than kind of the things that we're doing. You know, I mean, we learned a lot by just surveying our students a lot and trying to get at, you know, specific concerns in a course, and that's kind of what led us down this rabbit trail. So, I mean, it's a simple answer, but trying to get to know those users and those learners better will give you a better sense of, you know, is it structural of the course? Is it, you know, or is it, you know, language, or maybe it is, you know, a lack of belonging, and there's small things that she can do, but it really starts from trying to get to know your learners a little bit better, especially since you know sort of regions where that content is going, as opposed to us where we're just, you know, it's 190 countries, and we're trying to do something that applies to all of them. So, good question. All right. Well, thank you very much.